Live now, and
Okay.
welcome to everybody, and over to Josephine, my colleague Josephine Sellers. Thank you, Josephine.
Hi everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight. It's good to see that you're there, and I'm really going to hand over to Felicity now, and I'm going to ask her to begin to present how she came into being a soul midwife and explain the principles of it and how she works it, and we'll take it from there, and we'll be prompting Felicity with questions all the way through. Over to you, Felicity.
Okay, thanks so much, Josephine and John. It's an absolute honour to be here tonight talking to you and talking to everybody else out there. And, you know, if ever there was the time to be talking about what I do, end of life, death and dying and care is, you know, this is the moment. And I gulp when I say that, you know, it's such a huge time ahead of us. But my work is really about reaching out and trying to help people in any way that we can to accept the inevitable. Death is death, whether it comes sooner rather than later, whatever, it is there. And if we can embrace it and have conversations around it and bring it up into the light, bring it up into the open, I think that hopefully that's of service to all of us. So so here I am.
And can I just say, Felicity, you know, it is a subject we don't talk about. It's uncomfortable. And if you do raise the question, people, oh no, you're not going for years, and oh no, don't talk about that. But we do need to talk about it. It comes to us all, doesn't it?
We do, and we are so afraid of talking about it. It's almost been as if we talk about it, it's going to happen. Do you know, we find as soul midwives, and I'll go into exactly what soul midwives do and who we are and how we work in a minute, but we find that when we can start to loosen people up gently and to encourage them to ask questions, explore the subject a bit more, there is such a sense of empowerment that comes over people. Suddenly, if they can just push that fear factor aside just for a little while, people begin to engage in a creative way, often if they're held kindly and lovingly in that process.
Sorry, at what point, Felicity, do you get involved? Are you invited in?
Well, Josephine, it varies so much. So technically, a soul midwife can work with someone from point of diagnosis all the way through until their illness has increased and they've deteriorated. And then towards the end, we will sit and vigil at the bedside if that is appropriate, if it's required, if there is no one else who is closer to the person, and so often sadly there isn't. So we may vigil with them, and then we may also for a period of time continue the care, even though it's being done post-death. But when we're working with people who are very concerned about the whole dying process, we always say we don't just stop giving our care and our love when that last breath has been taken. We carry that on for as long as it feels right to be doing. So
in what respect?
Well, it's a very broad spectrum. So on the one hand, we when somebody is perhaps newly diagnosed and in a state of shock and chaos, you know, they don't know what's ahead of them, they don't know what the future has in store. Our work then is very much about companionship and listening and hearing about anxieties and concerns that are being raised, and then signposting to other people or things that might help them along the way, helping them to decide what a good death might mean to them, and then creating an end of life wish plan and bringing in all sorts of other people into the dynamic to enable that to happen. So that's one of the roles that we have, and that would be early on. But then right at the other end of the spectrum, we might be doing very very sacred work with them, because a soul midwife, if I give you a very simple definition, is a holistic and spiritual companion to the dying. So if we unpick that, holistic really covers all the holistic tools that we use, which range from deep listening skills, mindfulness, creative visualizations, breath work, hands-on body work if appropriate, all sorts of a range of things which should come under the holistic umbrella. And then the spiritual side of our work is really about deep companionship. So it's meeting the person on the very deepest level in a place that possibly they haven't really explored themselves very much before. So it's about holding that space and companionship and being there to be with them as they go through that journey, whatever that might require. So when we say spiritual, it's not religious, it's non-denominational, it has no religious quality to it other than relating to somebody on soul level, on a really deep soul level, and being there reliably throughout whatever happens. So when I say that we care for people right from the beginning, you know, we have a very different role then to the role that we have right at the end, where we might be, for instance, creating a very simple ceremony for them at the end of life. So simple, it might just be lighting candles and holding space and just creating a silent and beautiful space for them to be in. It might just be that. It might be more. Some of our soul midwives are actually nurses, funeral directors, all the way through, and they will do the whole thing. So it's a very, very wide spectrum that we cover. So
can I ask you, Felicity, how many, as a rough idea, how many deaths have you walked alongside with the...
Oh, goodness me. I sort of gave up counting. I first began my bedside work as a hospice volunteer. And so when I was doing that, I sat with many, many, many people who were at the end of life and who maybe didn't have visitors or family still left. You know, it's very sad when people are old and their family may live miles away, and their partners, wives, husbands may have already died. So there are a lot of elderly people who literally have no one left who is nearby and close enough to sit with them. So that was something that I was often called to do, and it was a huge honor to do that, and also a huge learning curve. You learn so much when you sit with someone who's dying. So to go back to your question, it's really hard to know how many, but it would definitely be into the hundreds, because I've been doing this for a long time now.
You do a lot of presenting, don't you? I know you present at the Marsden, don't you? Do you work
yes,
at the Marsden?
Yes, I've been so lucky that my ideas, which when I first started working in this way, there really wasn't anybody else doing this sort of thing. And so I think I was probably very much viewed as the mad woman, you know, who sort of came out of the blue and said, hang on a minute, let's do death differently. And there was a lot of curiosity, and there was animosity, and there were people saying this was amazing and other people saying this is absolute rubbish. You know, we have a very good medical system that knows exactly what they're doing, and I'm not discrediting that at all, but it was very interesting, the journey that came into this. But now I'm so lucky, you know, I'm asked to lecture at the Royal Marsden in London. I've done that a few times. I talk to many doctors about this other aspect of the whole dying care that we can be given, and we have many nurses who are also soul midwives, as well as some doctors and psychotherapists and counsellors, all sorts of people who are in our community. So,
and that you have also taken it all around the world, haven't you, Felicity? And you train your soul midwives.
Yes. Yes.
How many soul midwives? How many soul midwives are there?
Well, if I go back all throughout the years, there are over 900 that have come and trained. Not all of them are active all the time. Some have used the skills and taken them into other arenas, other professions, and that's wonderful. Others have done it to become volunteers, maybe with local community groups or specific groups like stroke clubs and cancer care centres. And others now increasingly are seeing it as an actual job. And we have, for instance, many nurses, oncology nurses and palliative care nurses who are ready to leave the profession, but they've got so much to give still. And so many of them come and train to become soul midwives. So it's a very diverse community. And I have a school in Bridport, and we have a rolling syllabus of courses throughout the year. And we get many people from all over the world who come, Canada and South Africa and Australia, the USA. It's lots and lots of people gravitate, which is just so exciting, really.
And I see you've got details of all that on your website, Felicity. So if people watching, are, I'm sure there will be people out there who feel they could be drawn. I mean, it's a calling, really, isn't it, Felicity? I want to ask about yourself. You know, you're working a lot with death all the time. How do you obviously have a calling and you can handle it. What sort of does it weigh on you? What's it like at the end of someone you've known for a month maybe, and then you take them to the end? I mean, that's death continual and a very soulful level. It's not a clinical thing, you know, it's not medical. You're doing this deep work with them. It must be very profound and quite a strain, I would think, on you.
I can't deny it isn't a strain, because it's constantly enriching, and I love the dialogue with the depth of the dialogue, the depth of relationship. With a dying person, you have to be totally authentic. There is no room for anything artificial. It is a relationship, a dance between two souls. It really is. And I think if you're drawn to that deep connection with people, it is so rich and so extraordinary that the power and the energy of that keeps you going. You know, you can be exhausted, but what you've learned, what you've heard, what you've seen, what you've shared in rich experience with that one person on such a deep level, it becomes something of its own, something greater than the past.
You exude passion for your Felicity. I think you sometimes move on to working with some of the family afterwards?
Yes, we do. So I mean, we've had to become quite structured. You know, when I first started my work, as I say, I was the mad woman that sat with dying people. And really not many people understood that. A lot of people would say, why on earth are you doing that? You know, it must be ghastly, it must be dreadful. And I'd say, no, it's amazing, it's very fulfilling. And I've just forgotten what you were asking me now. I got so excited.
About the strain on you.
About the strain, yes. I think the biggest thing that you learn from doing this work over a long period of time, which I've now done it for many, many, many years, you know, we're coming up more or less for about 20-25 years with sort of gaps at times, but at the beginning. I think that what we have learned now as a community of practitioners is that we also need to take care of ourselves. And I think that's something we still don't really understand very much in the community. People say taking care of yourselves, oh, it sounds sort of selfish, but actually it's a #1 requirement in terms of you need to take time out, you need to take time for your own healing to happen. And I think if you do that, then it doesn't become a strain.
And you obviously support each other's peers. I mean, in the therapy world, I rely on my peers for that support. That you're not
it's
alone.
Huge, and we're so lucky within the Soul Midwives community that we have such a sense of family. It really is family, you know, we really pull together, and especially at the moment with this current health crisis, we've just put out a shout for people to man a new telephone support network that we're hoping to launch next week. And the love and the passion that's coming in from our practitioners, offering so much, and the expertise they have between them is phenomenal.
Can you explain how you're going to run that and what exactly, you know, what people can ring in, can they, and
well, yes, we're literally working out the nuts and bolts of it at the moment. So we've been having a succession of meetings to work out how it will work, and it will. So at the moment, I can say it will be free for the public to use. They will be able to come, they will be able to telephone in or have a Skype consultation or an email consultation to be able to talk about any aspect of death or dying, or if they're caring for a loved one at home, they could ask us for some therapeutic tips and techniques and that sort of thing. So we're trying to have that for the whole country, but it's just working out the logistics at the moment. That's going to take a few more days, probably.
One of the difficult areas that we're going to be facing, and we know we are because we've looked at Italy, there are so many people dying alone in clinical conditions. And so will you work with their families afterwards?
We are really talking about this in a big way, because the shocking thing is that the nature of dying from something such as coronavirus is that it is completely medicalized and it's very clinical, and their relatives aren't able to go and see them. They're not able to go and say goodbye. And I fear that the grieving process is going to be so enormous and complex, and will need so much love poured into it and awareness of professionals supporting families. We are going to have to do a lot of work. And of course, we now know as well that if somebody dies, their funeral, probably the family won't be able to attend the funeral, probably. So, you know, that is another huge hurdle. Although bereavement work isn't our paramount work, our paramount work is always working one-to-one with a dying person. Within that, we also work with their families, because we work very closely to actually help the family we support the family to support the dying person as well, wherever there is family or friends. But we are going to really have to do a lot of work in the bereavement field afterwards, and extend our role, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. John, do you have some questions for Felicity?
Yeah, Felicity, yes, thank you very much. I mean, I haven't been with many people who've died, a few family members, and one of the things that strikes me sometimes is there can be quite a difference in the way that people approach being dying or being near death. And I've noticed there can be sometimes a tremendous sense of serenity, for example, is a sort of sometimes a particularly kind of ethereal quality in the room, which is very difficult to describe, but quite specific with a lot of people. And then other people will seem to go through quite a kind of struggle. I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit about your experience of that, if that's
Yeah.
something you found, or
Absolutely. Well, when I was beginning my work with the dying, I mean, I didn't have a clinical background. My background was as a health journalist specializing in complementary medicine, but I also did a lot of clinical health writing as well. So my natural instinct is to work with complementary medicine, and I have quite a lot of knowledge of that. But when I was sitting with dying people for hours and hours and hours, watching, observing, tuning into them, because I am a sensitive as well, so I was tuning in and watching not only what their outward signs were, but also noticing their energy shifts. And I could see that there was a series of stages that people were going through during the dying process. And this fascinated me because it was almost like watching a woman who's in labor going through the process of labor. And there are some marked processes within that. And I could see a similar thing in the dying process. So, in fact, part of our diagnostic model in soul midwifery, in understanding the dying process holistically and spiritually, is based on what I saw, what I watched, and we do see these stages that people pass through. So the first stage is a kind of and we're talking about old age here as the model, but it does relate into all other aspects of dying as well in slightly different ways. But, you know, to start with, somebody will become tired and weary and lose their joie de vivre. They lose their love of life. That will be a classic first stage. The next stage is a softness, a nostalgia, a melancholy, going back in time. Memories will come flooding up. So these stages pan out over several years if we're talking about old age. And then there's an angry stage, often an intense energetic stage. People get very hot, very restless, they get very agitated. In clinical medicine, that's called terminal agitation, and we call that the fire stage, because all our stages that we work with relate back to the elements, which has a link with Chinese medicine. But and then people become often quite dreamy, quite ethereal, quite luminous. And I think you just mentioned that. We would call that the air stage. So we're very conscious of a set of physical and psychospiritual stages that are all part of that dying process. And if we have a sudden death, those stages will still be present, but they'll be condensed and rapid and close together. So yes, we also say that people tend to die as they have lived. And so a very brave, jolly person will keep up that to the end. A very anxious person might turn in on themselves, become very introvert, and they may die in that way. So there are lots of sort of archetypal expressions of the dying process that we get to recognize as practitioners. So there's a lot there. And also I would say that there are three quite pronounced stages in the dying process. The first one is chaos. You know, when somebody is just entering the dying phase, there's a real sense of chaos in them. Then there'll be a sense of surrender at some stage, and then there will be a transcendent phase, and it's that transcendent phase which is that sort of wonderful letting go and serenity. So all these are very recognizable as practitioners. We see this.
Thank you. And I was also wondering about sort of like the nature of kind of consciousness or awareness. I was with a friend who was dying fairly recently, who was supposed to be kind of brain dead. I mean, they did a scan and there was really no activity, but he also, on one level, seemed to be conscious of who was in the room, and did various things like open his eyes at one point, and a few things. And I found that very interesting, and certainly there was a sense that he was somehow there, even though apparently there was no sort of brain activity going on.
Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about that?
I can. It's very fascinating. In my early days, when I consider it now to have been my field work, and I'm talking of a period of time of about 15 years of collecting information about what is going on during this process. I remember sitting with one elderly lady. She had advanced breast cancer, which had metastasized. She had been admitted to the hospice, and by her GP, she'd been referred, and her husband had stayed at home. He couldn't go and visit her. He was filled with anxiety because he thought if he actually went to see her at the hospice, it actually meant she was dying, and he hadn't come to terms with that. So he stayed at home, ate sandwiches, and had his overcoat on and watched the telly for 4 days. She, meanwhile, was really non-verbal. She wasn't speaking, wasn't eating, wasn't really drinking. She was just being kept alive with, she had fluids and some pain relief and that sort of thing. But when I sat with her, I was very conscious of her fluctuating enormously. And at some time she felt as if she was fully present in the room, fully present in her body, and there she was. But at other times it was as if she was outside her body and actually filling the whole room with her beingness, and I could feel the difference. There were real shifts in the energy, which was absolutely fascinating. And I'm going back to your experience with your friend who was registering very little brain activity, but still consciously having some sort of cognitive experience. I think we see that quite often. It's all very blurred, but certainly I think that people, as they're dying, do experience what it is like to be outside the body as part of that process. I find that very, very interesting indeed.
Yeah, I mean, you get those kind of experiences also in meditation, don't you? With sort of almost looking down on yourself sometimes, or
Yeah, you
about
do.
the body experience. I'm also wondering if you ever get a sense of other, I don't know, presences. I mean, there was a very beautiful interview on the radio recently. I think it was Radio 4, the World Service, with a guy. It was quite a famous story, and I can't remember his name. I'm sorry, but he was very sort of I would say almost an atheist apparently. And his daughter was on a flight to Spain, I think it was, and she had anaphylactic shock. She ate something. It was quite a famous story because it was.
Yes, I think I've heard it.
And as she was dying on the plane, he became aware, or he saw very clearly. He said in the interview he could describe these beings in exquisite detail. I think it was a number of what he described as angels, and they were quite small.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if is that a common experience for you? Do you get a sense of particular kind of I don't know, energies or beings coming in at that point to assist, or is that your sense of it?
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, that going back to those days when I just sat at the bedside for hours and hours and hours with people at the hospice, the most extraordinary things happened. And I can remember one lady, I got to know her very well. She was very lonely, didn't have many visitors, and the staff used to say to me, please sit with her and chat, you know, it means so much to her. And so I got to know her well, and she said to me one day, she said, do you know, I'd love to introduce you to my dad. And she was about 89, so I'm not very good at maths, but even I could work out that sounded a bit unlikely. Anyway, she said, yes, Dad comes in every night at 8 o'clock and he tucks me up in bed and he's there for me. And she said, I'd love you to meet him. Are you ever in at about that time of night? And I said, well, not usually, because I've got children at school and I'll be home. But anyway, within a week or so, I did happen to be in at that time of night because they were short-staffed and I was called in. And I thought I'll just go and knock on her door and see what's happening. Anyway, about 5 to 8, I looked in, she was fast asleep. So I thought, oh, bless her, she's gone to sleep now. Anyway, got my coat, got ready to go, got my bag, looked in on her at exactly 8 o'clock, and she's sitting bolt upright in bed, having a conversation with somebody at the other side of the room. So I just knocked on the door and said, hi, hello, are you okay? And she said, Dad's here. Now, I couldn't see Dad, but she could see him, and she was having the most amazing conversation with him. And she said, Dad, this is Felicity, who I've been telling you about. It was the most bizarre and extraordinary thing, but I have absolutely no doubt that she did see him in the room, and I completely honoured that. I have no idea what that was about, but that wasn't the first time, and certainly isn't the last time. We tend to think as soul midwives that there is, as people are going further into the dying process, it's as if their whole wave band expands, and so they see and feel and hear things that are way beyond our actual dimensions. So in fact, many dying people will tell you that they're seeing things. They may have prophetic dreams, they know things are going to happen. They might say, I'm going to die next Wednesday at tea time, and by the way, Arsenal are going to win on Saturday, and that thing will happen. So it's astonishing, and really I'd like to say that's one of the things that started my work with the dying, is thinking there are so many mysteries here that we don't talk about. We talk about all the kind of awful things and the medical problems, but actually we're not talking about the extraordinary things that happen, and they do happen, and they are so illuminating and extraordinary when you hear about them. You cannot help yourself but want to find out more about it, and that's what I eventually did, is to go out and talk to literally everybody I could find about what the nature of dying was. And that's really what the genesis of soul midwifery came from asking doctors, nurses, nuns, priests, shamanic practitioners, mediums, healers, what do you think dying is about? Getting a million different replies, but putting everything into a melting pot and seeing actually what that bigger picture was. So that was really a foundation of the work that has now grown into what we do.
I'm very glad, John, that you were the one that stepped in on that subject. I was wondering if I was allowed to. As you know, it steps into my own passion. I have sat with the dying, and the first time I really had that experience was when I sat for days with my father in a hospice, and my mother was there too, and it was summer and it was beautiful, and he was in a lovely hospice. I kept looking out at the scenery outside because we were there day and night. It was hours and hours. And a voice in my head said, turn around, and up behind him were two people. One I recognized as my grandmother, not that I'd known her because she died when I was young, but I'd seen pictures of her. And there was one other lady. And I turned to my mother and I said, there's two of them. And the other one, that's his sister. And within a minute, I heard that he's going to take his last breath, and he inhaled and he didn't exhale. And that was wonderful. That was absolutely wonderful. And, yesterday's people have been a big part of my life. And I think, well, that's just the way I see it, and my belief system. So I certainly don't want to enforce that on anybody else. But
no, and nor
anybody with any degrees of being an empath or psychic will
Yeah.
say this is the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we've seen it over and over and over in our work. I mean, not with everybody, not all the time, but so often that you can't really discount it. But as you say, we value and honor everyone's belief system, and you know that is just what I have experienced. So
You want to say something, John?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about, I mean, I imagine that a lot of what you do is sitting quietly with someone, maybe in silence for long periods of time.
oh yes,
Felicity, is that right? And how do you have a kind
absolutely.
of, I mean, I suppose the reason I'm asking this because, as I said, like some people appear to be perhaps sometimes struggling, so that I mean, this relates to kind of therapy work, I suppose, as well, in the sense of like a therapist is often a kind of anchor, perhaps of stillness or embodiment or presence
Yeah,
when someone is struggling with something rather. So I
yeah,
guess I imagine that it's kind of similar when someone is maybe struggling in that process of dying, that somehow you are an
yeah.
anchor for them, or you're a place of stillness or and safety. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So, you know, it's funny. A lot of people say, oh, soul midwifery, it sounds kind of new agey. In fact, it's ancient. You know, since man populated the planet, we have always known how to really sit with the dying. And really, those skills won't have changed very much over thousands and thousands of years. It's about being quiet, it's about being soothing, it's about giving reassurance, it's about giving space for things to happen. Dying is a very alchemical process, so that there are things going on all the time. And I think one of the roles that we have as therapists is to hold a safe space, to be a vessel partly for those things to happen in, and to make a safe space for that to be happening in as well. So when we're vigiling, and again, that's old as the hills, but it's dropped out of common kind of knowledge. In Ireland, yes, still it does happen, but vigiling is really about sitting quietly at the bedside, holding hands, speaking in a soothing and reassuring voice, sometimes singing. You know, it's surprising. You work with the atmosphere, you work with the moment, and sometimes it feels exactly right to be sitting and singing or reading or just in complete silence. But it makes such a difference to people if they've got that kind of one-to-one connection with someone with them. Imagine having that, or imagine being in a room completely on your own with you and noise and bustle. It's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you have what's your experience of working with say an atheist, for example? I mean, does it make any do they suddenly begin to I don't know what, maybe you could
Okay,
maybe you
I
could
think
talk
I
about
know
it.
what you're asking me. We have no, we work with any sort of faith or no faith at all. It doesn't matter if people, we work with the belief of the person we're working with. So if they have none, that's absolutely fine. We don't even go there. But there is an interesting psychospiritual dynamic that comes up in the dying process that I've really noticed, and that is that as the physical body diminishes, there is often a sort of spiritual awakening that happens, and it might be very, very subtle, but it's a sort of existential awakening. You know, people might start to suddenly say, well, who am I? What was life all about? What happens next? And it can surprise families enormously, because they think, God, Dad's never been like that before. That's really weird. Why is he suddenly asking these questions? We know that often happens. So we're there to catch that moment and then to gently work with it, with just listening, really, and then going along with whatever they're asking us. We explore, we have a conversation. But working with people we work with Buddhists, Quakers, Catholics, Hindus, Muslims, you name it. We work with everybody, and atheists as well. You know, it doesn't make any difference really.
Sure. I mean, I think a common thing is about wanting to perhaps repair rifts, like in relationship or something before
Yeah.
you go. Do you help in that kind of process at
Oh,
all?
we absolutely do. Yes. When we're working with somebody, we call the people we work with friends, so they're not patients, they're not clients. By necessity, we have to try and develop a very deep and very trusting relationship with them fairly quickly, and so we get to know people and what their what the background is to them dying, because it will probably have an impact on their dying experience. So if we were talking to somebody, you know, tell us a bit about your life and what's happened so far and what you hope to happen. If people tell you that they haven't spoken to their daughter for 30 years, but as far as they're concerned, that's it, you know, they don't need to do any more work on it, they've said goodbye, I would certainly flag that up as something that may well jump out of the cupboard at a later date during the dying process. So we're always watching to help people if there is something like a family rift, or there's been some enormous event that hasn't actually really ever been brought to closure or conclusion. That is part of our role, certainly in working with people, because in the dying process, really, it's best if everything that is a soul wound can come up and be released. We don't want to take stuff with us. And so that's one of the major roles of a soul midwife, is to help witness and facilitate the release of that soul wound. So that's really important. Yeah.
Do you want to?
Sorry, John.
No, I'm just wondering if you want to say something about your training and how
Yes.
long it is, or how you do it.
Okay, so I have the actual physical school in Bridport. It's at Watercleaves. If you know the Bridport area, it's near the Washing Pool Farm Shop, which is very popular. We're very lucky to have that space, and we run all sorts of courses there, but we have a basic training to become a soul midwife. You have to attend an introductory day, and then you come on a 3-day intensive. You really learn a plethora of not only hands-on therapeutic skills, but also all the background work on understanding the process of dying that I've touched a little bit on tonight, and lots more. I mean, for instance, we work with music and sound, we work with touch, all that is brought in, and also working with some aromatic oils that have a long tradition in working with the dying, and that's a speciality of mine. But we also have some very practical how to look after people safely, look after their safeguarding and well-being. So it's a very structured, very intense course. After that, people then have to find a voluntary placement somewhere, and to gather material for 6 case studies that have to be supported and mentored and checked before they're able to work out in the community as a soul midwife. We then have a level 2, which is really about care of the soul. It's about the after death care of the soul that we give, which is touching much more on the priestly role that soul midwives also have in the care of the dying. And we also run day courses, singing to the dying, preparing bodies for home preparation for burial. All these courses, it's a bit like a little Hogwarts Academy. We have courses you could never dream of, but all about death and dying and the soul, and it's amazing. We also have which is really good at the moment, a fantastic distance learning program. So if you, obviously we can't be doing hands-on teaching at the moment, but we have a really good distance learning program where you can still learn the skills to be a soul midwife and be mentored all the way through. And that we have students all over the world doing that. So that is carrying on and keeping us, you know, still bringing in new soul midwives, which is so important. We can't get enough soul midwives to care for all the people in the community that actually ask for us and need us. We need more all the time. So it's, you know, it's something that we will never be able to meet the demand for, probably. So yes.
And do you want to say something about your books as well, Felicity?
Oh, well, when I'm not doing all the things I do, I write books about death and dying. So I can show you. I don't know if you can see that. That's my first one, A Safe Journey Home, which is a very easy to read book about how to really make a difference to people at the bedside. Many people literally sit at the bedside of somebody and read that several times over, I'm told. I have postmen who have copies of this, who drop it through people's doors if they know there's somebody dying at home. This book has a life of its own. It does what it does. It's quite strange. I also have the Soul Midwife's Handbook, which is an absolute handbook for anyone working with the dying holistically and spiritually. It's got the essence of all the teachings in, really, and all sorts of information about how, again, you can work with the dying and really make a difference. And then the other book I've got is Sacred Oils. As I mentioned, that is a big part of my actual my own practice. I work with oils within a tradition that links way back to probably Egyptian celestial medicines. We work with aromatic oils, but as tools for consciousness. So these are not sweetly scented essential oils. These are very powerful tools to do very deep work with people. So that is something that I work with myself, and I also teach. It's very esoteric work, but very powerful, and it is work for this time. Certainly, this is about a world, working in a world that is changing very, very rapidly. So that is another thing that is a passion of mine. So yes.
How did you get to, because that's very specialist, that
very specialist.
How did you learn all that? Did you go somewhere, or how?
No, they tend to find you. I lived in my teenage years in Copenhagen in Denmark, and I had a group of friends who were all quite interesting and older than me, and one lady in particular who was an opera singer, she recognized that I had extreme sensitivity and I can see and work with energy. So she took me to have tea with someone she knew, and I went there feeling quite nervous, and this woman had just rows and rows, shelves and shelves of little tiny bottles, and we had our tea, and she got several of the bottles off the shelves and said, "Smell this, tell me what you think." And I sat there thinking, gosh, I don't know what's going on here, but several of the bottles, I'd lift the lid and go, oh my goodness. And I had extraordinary experiences, memories, flashbacks, visionary experiences from these oils. And over a period of about 5 years, all in all, she taught me how to work with the oils, with the energy of the oils, and how to safely work with them, because you have to work with a huge amount of high energy, and you have to learn how to actually hold that in your own body before you can learn to work with them. So it was a very long initiation, really, and it is what it is. So again, that's been a kind of background to all the healing work that I've done in all this time. I love my oils.
No, it's lovely. I love all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, in therapy, say I do craniosacral therapy, where we might hold someone's head or their back or something, and we sit there for a long time. And one of the aspects of that is we talk a lot about embodiment.
Yeah.
Because when you're sort of more in touch with your body, when you feel your body, you're much, you can come into presence and hold a safe space a lot. I would imagine, because you're dealing with a lot of quite strong energies in the room, whether it's the person who's dying or the people around or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That, do you have certain tools that you use for kind of centering yourself or bringing yourself back, so you don't get too caught up in the drama of what's happening?
Totally. So again, this would come into our training that we do. You can't just really walk into a room with a dying person and, without any experience, navigate those energies. They are extraordinary and really magnified. That there is something about the energy of the dying room that is really powerful. So we do teach a set of strategies for centering, and I mean, they do include breath work. So important in centering, about making sure that you clear your mind of everything before you walk into that room where there is somebody, that you are purely in an act of service when you are going to be with them. So we do a lot of work on that, and we'll also have personal things that work for us. So for instance, I do work a lot with breath, but I also work with an oil. I think I've got one here. Yeah, it's called Palo Santo. You may know of it. It actually means holy wood, and it's the most incredible oil. It comes from the Amazon, and you work with it. I rub some on my hands and swish it all around me, and that will really center me. That it has a very strong pungent smell, and that, apart from anything else, centers you, because you can smell the smell, and it reminds you to really center yourself hugely, and have a connection not only with the earth but also above. So there's quite a procedure for going in and working with someone who is dying. If you just walk in over and over and over into that sort of energy, you get very tired very quickly. So you do need a set of steps to take you into safe practice with that. Certainly.
I'm just wondering about your work in hospitals and how that's received, maybe.
Yeah.
Perhaps how you got into it.
I'm having a sniff now. Wonderful. Okay. Yeah, it was very exciting. Well, all sorts of amazing things have happened within our interface with the clinical establishment. 3 years ago, I was amazingly honoured to win a really big award from which was jointly given by the National Council for Palliative Care and also the Royal College of Nursing, and I was called Care Champion of the Year for End of Life, and had to go to the House of Lords and have a great big sort of big awards ceremony. I mean, I still can't believe it. It was so extraordinary and so exciting and so wonderful. Not on an ego sort of basis, but what it meant was it was real recognition from the clinical establishment that, yes, we see you. And I remember going up to pick up the award and thinking, wow, this is great. And then walking all the way back down this long room in the House of Lords, and literally all these professors were standing up clapping, and I thought, am I in a dream world? You know, this is so thrilling. So that really helped to cement some partnerships. And also, very excitingly, last September, the NHS actually in Dorset adopted soul midwifery in the form that we have for clinical environments, which we call TLC, so it's tender loving care. It's soul midwifery, but without all the really esoteric sides to it. And the NHS in Dorset adopted this practice throughout all their community hospitals. So anyone at the end of life in Dorset at the moment will be able to receive TLC, which is this version of soul midwifery. And that's been an enormous thing for us to have. We also now have many GPs who refer patients to us, and also some consultants in various places. We do work, we're increasingly working with medics to really bring together, you know, the best that medicine can offer. There's medicine and there's the holistic approach, which can only be good for everyone, I feel. So, you know, exciting times.
Wonderful.
I just
sorry,
okay.
Sorry, no, just one last thing. There's a question from Sheila, who's one of my colleagues, Sheila Keane, who's asking a couple of quick questions. Can men train too?
Yes, definitely. We've got about 20% of soul midwives are men, and they're amazing.
Fantastic. And then she says, and what can we each do now for all those who will be dying alone in clinical situations?
It's very hard to say collectively, other than to consciously and with awareness to beam out compassionate care for the dying within our hearts. That is a big thing that we can do. But also, if we know of people dying within our communities who are alone or who are struggling, maybe to knock on that door and offer yourself. Can I get shopping? Can I help you with something around the house? Can I sit with your dying loved one while you go out or do whatever? I mean, these times are extraordinarily difficult, but just ask and offer kindness. Practicing kindness is a big thing you can do, and just hoping, lighting a candle each night and beaming out love, I believe has a potency to it as well.
Thank you.
So we make a big celebration, and the process of birth is honoured, revered and beautiful, but you've spoken tonight at a soul level, because when we leave this world, we also deserve, and this needs to happen. And in ancient cultures, this was done, and it isn't in this Western culture. And you brought it into being, Felicity, and I admire you for what you've done.
Oh.
I think it's absolutely beautiful. And to everybody else, I would say, to those, the souls leaving the earth at the moment, there are groups of people who sit to help those souls leave this, and you will understand that, and I understand it. And you know, for me, every night when I go to sleep, I would say to the souls leaving, I would help to move them on. We can do that with the power of love. We're sending them home with the power of love and compassion.
We are. Oh, I absolutely echo everything you're saying there, Josephine. And you know, another thing to remember is we can be the team on this side, but there is also a team on the other side.
Absolutely. And
we work with them.
And I'm sure there are people out there hearing that today. And I just want to say, there are people who work with those souls that do leave this world alone in clinical situations. There are people who are aware that that work needs to be done. And we'll probably find people of that ilk that we can talk to in a greater depth at some time. I really want to thank you, Felicity. It's wonderful to hear it. It's very reassuring. It's really beautiful. And I think death in itself can be a beautiful, soulful, and compassionate process. And that's what's nice to hear. It's nice for people to hear. Have you asked all you want to ask, John?
Yes, I was just going to ask about your website, but it's soulmidwives.co.uk, isn't it? I'll put it up on Facebook.
It is. Yes, it is. So please tell everyone. And you know, we're really connected with the community, so you know, at this time we've all got to work together with compassion and love. And as Josephine was saying, you know, death, it can be beautiful, and it should be a sacred experience as well. So let's all join in with that, really, I think.
Thank you so much, Felicity. And I'd ask anyone watching, you know, if you feel you want to share this video, push it out there. Let people hear this. Let's remove this non-talking about death. It's being brought to our attention at the moment. It's being brought to the light. And so let's share it out there. And this dark cloud can be lifted somewhat for people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me, and just thank you so much to everybody as well. You know,
thank you, Felicity. And before we end, I just want to say that in 2 weeks' time, on Monday, the 6th of April, John and I will be talking to another colleague of mine who works in bereavement in a profound and beautiful and eclectic and holistic way. She was trained by someone who was my supervisor for many years. She's wonderful in the work that she does, and I think we need to talk about bereavement work now on a soulful level, on a practical level. She worked a lot with children and families who had lost grandparents and older people, so she does a lot of outdoor work, which she obviously can't do at the moment. But we will be talking to Emma Pritchard on Monday, the 6th of April at 7 o'clock. And I will put more information about how Emma works up on Facebook in the coming weeks as we advertise our next venture into these live interviews. Thank you. And John, thank you so much. You're the technician there, not my department at all. And I want to thank John, because I've known John for years. We've worked together on and off for years. And I went for some treatment because I had trouble with my head. And this evolved. Let's do something together. It felt right. And well, look what's happened. So that's wonderful. Thank you, John.
Oh, thank you, Josephine, and thank you so much, Felicity. That was really wonderful. I'd love to meet you down in Bridport sometime. That'd be
definitely
great. Thank you very much. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.